Boone Carter thought he had found the perfect place to disappear, but the girl who emerged from the tree line that morning would prove him wrong in ways he never imagined. She moved like no human he had ever seen, yet she was undeniably one of them. The old ranch stretched out before him in the early morning light, its weathered fence posts standing like sentinels against the endless grassland. Boone gripped the wooden rail of his porch, breathing in the crisp air that carried no sounds of civilization. This was exactly what he needed after the chaos that had driven him from town. Here, among the rolling hills and scattered oak trees, he could rebuild his life in peace. He was reaching for his coffee mug when movement caught his eye near the distant woods. A figure darted between the trees with an odd fluid grace that made him squint harder. Too small to be a man, too quick to be a deer. Boone stepped down from the porch, his boots crunching on the dry earth as he moved toward the corral for a better view. The figure emerged fully into the clearing, and Boone's breath caught in his throat. It was a young woman, maybe 18 years old, but everything about her was wrong. Her long dark hair hung wild and tangled. Her clothes were torn scraps that barely covered her lean frame, and she moved in a low crouch that spoke of years spent on 4 legs rather than 2. She froze when she spotted him, her head snapping up with an alertness that reminded him of a startled animal. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the 50 yards of open ground. Her eyes held intelligence, but also something feral that made the hair on his neck stand up. Boone raised his hand slowly, palm forward, the way he might approach a spooked horse. "Easy there," he called softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl tilted her head at the sound of his voice, curiosity flickering across her face. But then something else caught her attention, a sound Boone couldn't hear, and she spun toward the woods. A low growling echoed from the tree line, deep and threatening, followed by the unmistakable sound of multiple large animals moving through the underbrush. When Boone looked back, the girl was gone, vanished as suddenly as she had appeared. But the growling continued, and now he could see shapes moving in the shadows between the trees. Large gray shapes with yellow eyes that reflected the morning sun. His hand instinctively moved to the rifle mounted beside his door, but he forced himself to stay calm. Whatever was happening here, whatever this girl's story was, it was clear his quiet life on the ranch had just become far more complicated than he had bargained for. 3 days passed before Boone saw her again, but the signs of her presence were everywhere. Fresh footprints around his water well, small and bare, unlike any boot print he had ever seen. Scraps of food disappeared from his porch, and twice he found strange markings carved into the bark of the oak tree near his cabin. He was mending a section of fence when she appeared again, this time closer than before. She crouched behind a boulder, watching him work with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. Boone pretended not to notice, continuing to hammer nails into the weathered wood while stealing glances in her direction. "You're welcome to come closer," he said without looking up. "I've got fresh water and food if you need it." The girl's head tilted again. That same curious gesture he had seen before. She understood him, that much was clear, but she remained frozen in place like a wild animal weighing its options between curiosity and caution. Boone set down his hammer and slowly reached into his saddlebag, pulling out a piece of dried meat. He tossed it gently toward the boulder, close enough for her to reach but far enough to keep her at a safe distance. The meat landed with a soft thud on the grass. She studied the offering for several long minutes before creeping forward on her hands and knees. Her movements were fluid and precise, each step calculated to avoid making unnecessary noise. When she reached the meat, she sniffed it thoroughly before tearing into it with teeth that looked surprisingly sharp. As she ate, Boone noticed details he had missed before. Scars crisscrossed her arms and legs, old wounds that spoke of a harsh life in the wilderness. Her fingernails were long and dirty, more like claws than human nails. But it was her eyes that held him. Despite everything wild about her, there was a depth there that reminded him she was still human underneath it all. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She looked up from the meat, chewing slowly but said nothing. Instead, she made a sound deep in her throat, something between a growl and a hum that sent chills down his spine. The peaceful moment shattered when the sound of approaching horses echoed across the valley. Boone turned to see 3 riders cresting the hill, their silhouettes dark against the afternoon sky. The girl heard them too, and her entire body went rigid with fear. She was gone before the riders reached the fence line, melting back into the landscape with the same ghost-like speed she had shown before. But not before Boone caught something in her expression that made his blood run cold. It was not just fear he had seen in her eyes. It was recognition. She knew these men, and whatever history existed between them, it was nothing good. The lead rider dismounted with the casual confidence of a man who had never been told no. Sterling Maddox was built like a bear, with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Behind him rode two younger men, both carrying rifles across their saddles and wearing the hard expressions of men who made their living through violence. "Afternoon," Sterling called out, tipping his hat but keeping his hand near his holster. "Name's Maddox. We're tracking something dangerous through these parts." Boone set down his hammer and walked toward the fence, noting how the men positioned themselves to block any escape routes. "Dangerous how?" "Wild girl," Sterling said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Been living with wolves, killing livestock, terrorizing folks for miles around. Some say she's not fully human anymore." He spat into the dust. "We aim to put an end to that problem." The casual way he spoke about ending a human life made Boone's jaw clench. "Haven't seen any wild girl," he lied smoothly. "Just moved in here myself a week ago." Sterling's eyes narrowed as he studied Boone's face. "Funny thing about tracks, they don't lie like people do." He gestured toward the ground near the water well. "Fresh footprints, bare feet, small like a woman's, leading right to your property." One of the younger men, a wiry fellow with nervous energy, shifted in his saddle. "Boss, maybe she's already moved on. Could be miles from here by now." "Shut up, Pike," Sterling snapped without taking his eyes off Boone. "She's here. I can smell the fear on this one." He stepped closer to the fence, his hand now resting openly on his gun. "See, Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter, this girl ain't some lost child you can save with kindness. She's been raised by beasts. Thinks like a beast. Acts like a beast. She killed a man's prize bull just last week. Tore its throat out with her bare teeth." Sterling's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "Now, I can search this property the easy way or the hard way. Your choice." Boone felt his own hand drift toward his weapon, but he forced himself to stay calm. 3 against 1 weren't good odds, especially when they were already suspicious. "Like I said, haven't seen anyone matching that description." Sterling studied him for another long moment, then nodded slowly. "Pike, Dalton, spread out. Check the woods, the outbuildings. Everywhere she might hide." He turned back to Boone. "And Mr. Carter, if I find out you're lying to me, protecting something that dangerous, well, let's just say accidents happen out here in the wilderness." As the two men rode off toward the tree line, Sterling remained mounted near the fence, his predatory gaze sweeping the landscape. Boone tried to act natural, returning to his fence work, but his mind raced. The girl was out there somewhere, probably watching, probably terrified, and now she had nowhere to run without exposing herself to these hunters who clearly saw her as nothing more than an animal to be destroyed. The sound of Pike's voice calling from the woods made both men freeze. "Found something," Pike's voice echoed through the trees. Sharp with excitement, Sterling spurred his horse toward the sound, leaving Boone alone by the fence, his heart hammering against his ribs. Boone forced himself to keep working, driving nails with mechanical precision while his ears strained to catch every sound from the woods. The girl was smart, had survived out there for years apparently, but 3 armed men with hunting experience would be a different kind of threat than anything she had faced before. Minutes stretched like hours before Pike emerged from the tree line, holding something in his raised hand. Even from a distance, Boone could see it was a piece of torn fabric, dark and rough. "Fresh tear," Pike called out. "Still has her scent on it. She was here recent." Sterling's face split into a predatory grin. "Start tracking. She can't have gone far." He wheeled his horse around to face Boone. "Looks like your memory might be improving, Carter. Want to reconsider what you told me?" "Don't know what that proves," Boone said, keeping his voice level. "Could be from anyone. Lots of folks pass through these parts." "Folks wearing wolf pelts?" Sterling laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's wolf fur mixed in with the cloth, boy. Tell me, how many civilized people you know wear wolf pelts?" The sound of Dalton's rifle shot cracked across the valley like thunder, followed immediately by his triumphant shout. "Got movement! She's running toward the creek!" Boone's blood turned to ice. If they had actually spotted her, she was as good as dead. These men weren't interested in capture. They wanted to end what they saw as a threat permanently. Sterling was already spurring his horse toward the sound when Boone made his decision. He dropped his hammer and vaulted over the fence, landing hard but staying on his feet. "Wait!" The hunter pulled up short, turning in his saddle with raised eyebrows. Finally ready to talk sense? She's not dangerous, Boone said, the words tumbling out faster than he intended. Just scared. Trying to survive. You don't need to hunt her like an animal. So you have seen her. Sterling's hand moved to his rifle. Been lying to me this whole time. Another shot echoed from the creek, followed by cursing. Dalton's voice carried clearly across the distance. Missed. She's fast as lightning. Boss. Boone stepped forward, his hands raised but ready. Let me talk to her. Maybe I can convince her to leave peaceful-like, find somewhere else to go. Sterling studied him with calculating eyes. Or maybe you're sweet on this wild thing. Wouldn't be the first lonely man to lose his head over a pretty face. Even one that belongs to a killer. The third shot was closer this time, and it was followed by a sound that made Boone's blood freeze. A cry of pain, distinctly human, distinctly female. The girl had been hit. Dalton got her! Pike whooped from somewhere in the trees. Sterling's grin was savage now. Looks like we won't be needing your help after all, Carter. He started to turn his horse toward the creek, then paused. Course, if you've been harboring her, helping her, well, that makes you an accessory to her crimes. But Boone was already running toward the creek, Sterling's threats forgotten. Behind him, he heard the hunter curse and spur his horse into pursuit. If this story is touching you in any way, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with someone who loves a good Western tale, and subscribe to the Western Redemption channel. Every single day at exactly 1 p.m., a brand new story drops, packed with emotion, justice, and redemption. So turn on the notification bell and don't miss the next chapter, because out here in the West, no one waits around. Boone crashed through the undergrowth, branches tearing at his clothes as he followed the sound of the creek. His lungs burned, but he pushed harder when he heard another pained cry, weaker this time. Behind him, Sterling's horse thundered through the trees, closing the distance with every stride. He found her crouched behind a fallen log near the water's edge, clutching her left shoulder where dark blood seeped through her fingers. The bullet had grazed her, carving a deep furrow across her upper arm. But she was alive. When she saw him approaching, she bared her teeth and snarled, the sound more animal than human. Easy, Boone whispered, dropping to his knees several feet away. I'm here to help. Her wild eyes darted between him and the sounds of approaching horses. She understood the danger, but pain and fear had stripped away whatever trust he had begun to build. Blood loss was making her weaker by the minute. Dalton emerged from the trees to their left, rifle raised and ready. There she is. Hold still, you wild thing. Boone threw himself sideways, placing his body between the gun and the girl just as Dalton squeezed the trigger. The bullet whistled past his ear, close enough to feel the heat. Don't shoot! She's hurt! Get out of the way, Carter! Dalton worked the bolt action, chambering another round. That thing needs putting down. The girl tried to rise, to flee, but her wounded arm buckled and she collapsed back against the log. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, and Boone could see shock setting in. If he didn't get her medical attention soon, Sterling's problem would solve itself. Pike crashed through the brush from the right, cutting off another escape route. Now they had her surrounded, with Boone as the only thing standing between her and certain death. Step aside, Carter. Sterling's voice came from directly behind them, calm and commanding. This ends now. Boone slowly stood, keeping himself positioned as a human shield. She's bleeding out. Look at her. She's not a threat to anyone like this. Good, Sterling said coldly. Makes our job easier. The girl's eyes met Boone's, and for a moment, he saw past the wildness to something that broke his heart. Fear, yes, but also a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this strange man would keep his word about helping her. Please, she whispered, the first word he had heard her speak. Her voice was rough, unused to human speech, but unmistakably human. Please don't let them. The simple plea hit Boone like a physical blow. In that moment, he realized this wasn't just about protecting an injured person. This girl, whatever her story, whatever she had become, was making a choice to trust him with her life. Sterling cocked his rifle behind them. Last chance, Carter. Move, or I'll shoot through you to get to her. Boone looked down at the girl, at the blood flowing between her fingers, at the trust and terror warring in her eyes. Then he made his choice. Boone's hand dropped to his holster, fingers wrapping around the grip of his Colt. The movement was slow, deliberate, but Sterling caught it immediately. Don't be stupid, Carter, Sterling warned, his rifle now trained on Boone's back. 3 guns against 1. You do the math. Maybe, Boone said without turning around. "But I only need to take down one of you before the others think twice about what they're doing." Pike shifted nervously, his rifle wavering. "Boss, maybe we should just let him tend to her wounds. She ain't going nowhere hurt like that." "Shut up, Pike," Sterling snapped. "This man's lost his mind over some wild animal." The girl pressed harder against her wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Her eyes never left Boone's face, as if drawing strength from his steady presence. She whispered something too low for the others to hear, but Boone caught it. "Willa. Her name." She was telling him her name. "Willa," he repeated softly, and her eyes widened with surprise that he understood. "Touching," Sterling said with disgust. "Pike, circle around behind that log. Dalton, keep your rifle on Carter. Soon as Pike gets a clear shot, we end this." Boone felt Pike moving to his left, the young man's boots splashing through the shallow creek water. In seconds, Willa would be exposed from multiple angles, and no amount of courage would save her from 3 rifles. That was when the first howl echoed across the valley. Every man froze, rifles momentarily forgotten as the haunting sound rolled over them. It was deep, mournful, and distinctly not human. Sterling's face went pale. "Wolves," Dalton whispered. "Whole pack, by the sound of it." Willa's head snapped up, and for the first time since he had found her, she smiled. It was a wild, fierce expression that sent chills down Boone's spine. She raised her head and answered the call with a howl of her own, high and clear and absolutely primal. The response was immediate. More howls erupted from the forest around them. Closer this time. Much closer. "They're coming," Pike said, his voice cracking with fear. "Jesus Christ, they're coming for her." Sterling tried to regain control. "Just wolves. They're afraid of gunfire. We can—" His words were cut off by the sound of large bodies crashing through the undergrowth. Not running away from the gunshots, but toward them. The pack had heard Willa's call and they were answering. Yellow eyes began appearing in the shadows between the trees, reflecting the dappled sunlight. Not just 2 or 3 animals, but a dozen or more, surrounding the creek in a loose circle that was slowly tightening. Dalton's rifle shook in his hands. "Boss, we need to get out of here, now!" But Sterling's face had hardened with desperate determination. "No, we came here to finish this, and that's what we're going to do." He swung his rifle toward Willa. "Kill the girl, and the wolves will scatter." Boone drew his gun in one smooth motion, the barrel coming up just as Sterling's finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot echoed like thunder across the creek. Sterling jerked backward, his rifle flying from his hands as Boone's bullet caught him in the shoulder. The hunter stumbled, crying out in pain and rage, but he was still alive. "You shot me!" Sterling gasped, clutching his wounded arm. "You shot me for that animal!" But Boone wasn't listening. The wolves had taken Sterling's gunshot as a signal, and now they were moving. Gray shapes poured out of the forest, not attacking yet, but positioning themselves with the calculated precision of pack hunters. Their leader, a massive male with silver-streaked fur, stepped into the clearing and fixed his yellow gaze on the armed men. Pike's nerve broke first. "I'm getting out of here." He fired wildly into the trees, then turned and ran toward his horse, crashing through the underbrush like a man possessed. Dalton was backing away more slowly, his rifle trained on the pack leader, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the weapon steady. "They're not acting natural, boss. Wolves don't behave like this." "Because she's calling them." Sterling struggled to his feet, his face twisted with pain and fury. "She's got them trained somehow, turned them into weapons." Willa was speaking to the wolves, but not in any language Boone recognized. It was a series of low sounds, growls and whines that seemed to calm the pack. The great male tilted his head, listening, then let out a short bark that the others seemed to understand. "They're not attacking," Boone realized. "They're just protecting her." Sterling reached for his fallen rifle with his good arm, but the pack leader saw the movement and stepped forward with a low growl that made the hunter freeze. "This ain't over, Carter," Sterling snarled. "I'll be back with more men, more guns. That thing is a danger to every decent person in this territory." "Then you better bring an army," Boone said, his gun still trained on Sterling's chest. "Because I'm not moving." Dalton had reached his horse and was already mounted, his face pale with terror. "Boss, we need to go. Now!" Sterling glared at Willa one last time, pure hatred burning in his eyes. "This won't end well for you, girl. Mark my words." He stumbled toward his horse, favoring his wounded shoulder. The wolves watched but didn't pursue, content to see the threat retreating. As the 3 hunters rode away, their shouts and curses fading into the distance, The pack began to melt back into the forest. The great male approached Willa carefully, nuzzling her wounded shoulder with surprising gentleness before disappearing into the trees with the others. Willa looked up at Boone, her face streaked with tears. She probably didn't even realize she was crying. "Thank you," she whispered. "They would have killed me." Boone holstered his gun and knelt beside her. "We need to get that shoulder cleaned and bandaged. Can you make it back to the ranch?" She nodded, though her face was pale from blood loss. As Boone helped her to her feet, he realized his quiet life was over forever. But looking into her grateful eyes, he found he didn't mind as much as he thought he would. 3 weeks later, Boone watched from his porch as Willa emerged from the forest with her morning gathering of herbs and wild berries. Her wounded shoulder had healed cleanly, leaving only a pale scar as evidence of that violent day by the creek. She moved with more confidence now, though she still startled at sudden sounds and preferred the shadows to open ground. The transformation had been gradual but remarkable. Under Boone's patient guidance, she had remembered fragments of human speech, words buried deep beneath years of survival instincts. She could now hold simple conversations, though she often lapsed into the growls and gestures that had served her so well among the wolves. "Morning, Willa," Boone called softly as she approached the cabin. "Morning, Boone," she replied, her voice still rough but growing stronger each day. She had learned to wear the simple dresses he had bought in town, though she preferred to go barefoot and kept her long hair unbound. She set her gathering basket on the porch steps and joined him at the rail, both of them looking out over the peaceful valley. The wolves still came sometimes, but only at her call, and only when she needed the comfort of their presence. They understood somehow that this place was safe, that the man who lived here meant no harm to their pack sister. "Sterling hasn't come back," Boone observed, though they both knew the hunter's promise of return had been hollow. Word had spread through the territory about the failed hunt, about the rancher who had faced down 3 armed men to protect a wild girl. Most folks steered clear of Boone's property now, which suited them both just fine. Willa nodded, then surprised him by speaking more than she usually did. He was afraid, not of guns or wolves, afraid of what I represented, something he couldn't understand or control. Her insight impressed him. Beneath the wild exterior, her intelligence had never been damaged, only suppressed by the need for survival. Each day brought new evidence of the person she had been before the wilderness claimed her. "What about you?" Boone asked. "Any regrets about staying here instead of going back to the pack?" Willa considered this seriously, as she did most questions. "The wolves are family, but they cannot teach me what I need to learn now." She looked at him with those remarkable eyes. "You showed me that humans can choose kindness over fear. That is worth learning." Boone smiled, thinking about how much his life had changed since that first morning when she had appeared at the edge of his vision. He had come here seeking solitude, running from a world that had grown too complicated and cruel. Instead, he had found purpose in protecting someone who needed him. "Besides," Willa added with a rare smile, "someone needs to keep you from getting lonely out here." As the sun climbed higher over the valley, they stood together in comfortable silence, 2 unlikely companions who had found peace in the middle of nowhere, the wild girl and the solitary rancher, building a life that belonged entirely to them. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.